episode of Almost Well Versed. Thanks so much for tuning in again this week. Always glad to see my loyal viewers out here. Guys, I hope you really enjoyed last week's episode. The Lost Metal, man, don't even get me started talking about the Cosmere, because I'm gonna go on and on and on, if you couldn't tell from that episode. But thanks for all the love and support. I'm sure by now I'm deep in the Lost Metal. We'll talk about that some other time. But today, finally, an episode I've been talking about making for like a minute now, but, you know, life. Still not the one with Daz. We're still trying to figure that out. But the other book I was talking about, a murder mystery. And guys, this one took a lot out of me. I don't know if it was because it's like a mystery thriller type. Like, it was just... It was a lot writing these notes. Like, I really think I spent almost a month trying to pound out these notes, because with so many moving pieces, you just got to make sure that everything is, you know, in a line. So then when we're talking about it, you're not confused, I'm not confused. But enough about that. Today, we're going to talk about a book that I actually saw on Instagram. I think that's where I first saw about it. And I'm sure a lot of people out there have read it. Like, my sister-in-law's read it. A lot of people that follow me on Instagram have read it. And it's called The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. And I actually have this physical book. Yeah. And it's written by Stuart Turton. It came out in 2018, I believe. And it's funny because when you look this book up, it's actually called something else in the UK. In the UK, it's called just The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. So when I was doing my research on this book, I was really confused, because I'm like, is it 7.5 deaths? Is it just 7 deaths? But it turns out in the US, they actually had to change the name because it too closely resembled another really popular book that's called The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, a book written by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So in the US version, it's called The 7.5 Deaths. Everywhere else, it's just called The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. And like I said, it's like a murder mystery thriller type book. And honestly, I think it's the first from that genre that I've ever read. I don't know if I've ever read like a murder mystery type book. I know they're all the rave, like in book clubs and stuff, but I usually tend more toward fantasy. But, you know, I saw a lot of people talking about it. I saw it all over Instagram. So I said, you know what, let's just give it a try. And so in my research for the book, I saw that right now it has a 3.87 on Goodreads, which I think is pretty accurate. And as we go through the book, you'll see what I mean. But it did win a couple awards. It won the Best First Novel Prize in won the Best First Novel Prize in the 2018 Costa Book Awards. And then it also is being adapted into a show right now. I'm assuming it's still in like post-production. Apparently the Netflix in the UK, they are producing a 7-episode series about the book. So keep an eye out for that. Should be good. But yeah, enough of the little background. So let's just jump right into it. I feel like it's been a minute since we sat down and actually did like a proper like book summary, like go through a book. So let's do it. So the book starts with our protagonist. He wakes up in some forest and he has amnesia, right? So he can't remember his name. He can't remember where he is, but all he remembers is that he's looking for somebody named Anna, right? And so as he's like trying to get his bearings together, he hears a gunshot. So he's like, oh, time for me to leave. So he leaves the forest, and then happens into like the yard for this big grand manor, right? And he was like, well, I guess I got to ask them for help. You know, I don't know who I am, where I am. So he goes and knocks on the door, and he's greeted by some sketched out butler, right? The butler was just like really skittish and wasn't trying to talk to him or whatever. But it turns out that our protagonist, our main guy, he's a guest there at the manor, and his name is Sebastian Bell, right? And the whole thing is there's a grand party planned this evening hosted by the manor's owners, which are called the Hardcastles. You've got Peter Hardcastle and Helena Hardcastle. They're the ones that own the property, right? And so as he's wandering the halls, he runs into an old friend of his, some guy named Daniel Coleridge. And Coleridge, he's actually like a little worried about Sebastian, like seeing his amnesia and like how he doesn't even know what's going on, right? So he offers to send, there's a doctor in attendance for the party. So Daniel Coleridge was like, well, let me just like send the doctor up to your room. He can like check you out, make sure everything's okay. And Sebastian's like, all right, I guess so. So Sebastian heads to his room and the doctor meets him there. And the doctor, as he's like examining him, finds like he has like slash marks on his arms, and in hopes of trying to jog his memory, the doctor tells him that the night before, while they were at dinner, some maid handed him a note, and as soon as he got this note, he like jumped up and left, and that was like the last time anybody saw him for the evening, right? And he also learns that who he was dining with is one of the Hardcastles. So you got Peter and Helena, they're the parents, and then they have two kids. You have Evelyn, the namesake for the title, and then the brother Michael, right? And so at the dinner, Sebastian was dining with Michael. So of course Sebastian was like, well, let me go find Michael, maybe he can tell me like what the note said, or you know what was going on. And so he finds Michael, who tells him, yeah, some maid gave you a note. And in talking to Michael, he learns about some grand tragedy that happened here at the manor 19 years ago, right? So apparently Michael and Evelyn used to have a younger brother, but the younger brother was murdered by one of the groundskeepers. And it was one of the groundskeepers, and some guy named Charlie Carver apparently killed the younger brother. And so Charlie Carver, he was caught and actually hung for his crime, but the other groundskeeper, they never found him, and he's like still out there somewhere, right? And so apparently Michael believes that the groundskeeper from that murder, he's gonna be in attendance at the party tonight. And so he's like all in a tizzy, like, I gotta find who killed my brother, you know. And Sebastian's like, I don't even know your brother, but okay, whatever. So that's going on. And then after that, all the guys all the men in attendance for this party, they all decide they want to go out on a hunting trip to pass the time in the afternoon, like before dinner or whatever. But Sebastian was like, you know, I just woke up in a forest. I don't know what's going on. I don't think I'm trying to go on a hunting trip, right? So he decides to stay behind. And so while everyone else leaves, he, you know, is trying to not snoop around, but he's trying to go around, figure out what's going on, who he is, why has he got amnesia, right? So he heads back to his room. And then once he gets back in his room, there's some guy dressed up like in a plague doctor's outfit who's like blocking his door, and he's like, excuse me, sir, this is my room. And then the plague doctor is like kind of weird, but he just asked him, he was like, what did you remember when you woke up? And Sebastian's like, Anna? And then the plague doctor is just like, well, that's a pity, and then just like ominously walks away. And Sebastian's like, okay. And so after he meets this weird plague doctor guy, he runs into two important characters in our story. He meets Evelyn Hardcastle, who, like I said, is the daughter of the estate or whatever. And then he also runs into a man named Lord Ravencourt. And Ravencourt, he is like a well-to-do, like rich guest at the party tonight. And the two of them, they're super engrossed in a game of chess, right? So Sebastian, he doesn't super want to interrupt, but, you know, he's trying to like chat it up with Evelyn because apparently they know each other. And so Evelyn tells him that the maid that could have delivered the note, that the person who would know who the maid was that delivered the note would be the butler, right? So Sebastian's like, all right, so I gotta go find this butler now. The butler turns out to be a guy named Mr. Collins. That's the guy who answered the door this morning. And while he's out there looking for Mr. Collins, turns out that he got beat up. Someone just beat him almost to death. And so he's like unconscious in a bed in one of the guest rooms, right? So he's just like, well, there goes that lead. And so Oh, and the person who beat him up, is like the resident artist. So apparently there's also one of the guests for the party is some well-to-do artist who was gonna do like portraits of the family or whatever. Some guy named Gregory Gold. And so for some reason, Gregory Gold, the artist, decides to beat the shit out of the butler. Okay, fine, whatever. So Sebastian was like, well, let's go visit Mr. Collins. Maybe he's like, regained consciousness at this point or something. So Evelyn, she decides to come with him, right? So they're on their way to go and find where the butler is staying at, and they see Gregory Gold, so the artist that beat up the butler. They see that he's literally like strung up to the ceiling. Somebody like tied his hands to a hook in the ceiling, and he's like strung up and beat up. And Sebastian sees that, and he's like, what the fuck? And Evelyn, like, it was like no thing to Evelyn. She was just like, yeah, my dad, he don't mess around, when people like hurt people that we like. And Sebastian's like, okay, not weird. And so they end up making it to Mr. Collins' room, the butler's room, but he's asleep, and he's being watched over by a maid. How convenient. Right? And so the maid tells him that the maid who delivered him the note the night before is named Madeline. And so they're like, okay, well, let's go find Madeline. You see what I mean? Like, this is what I mean when I had to like really take my time doing these notes, because there's so many characters and they'll all be important in some way, right? So Sebastian and Evelyn decide to go find the maid Madeline, the one that supposedly delivered him the note the night before, right? So on the way, Sebastian and Evelyn, they get to talking, and you learn that the day that the younger brother Thomas was murdered, Evelyn was supposed to be watching him, and all these years she's carried this grief with her for not, looking out for her little brother, right? And Sebastian is like, remember, he's got amnesia, so this is all new to him. He's trying to figure out like what's going on, but like Evelyn is like kind of like not dodgy, but like she's curious as to why he's so interested, because you learn that the whole reason why Sebastian Bell is in attendance to this party is because he's like the resident drug dealer. Like the whole reason why they invited him is because he's the one that like supplies this like well-to-do group of people with their like pharmaceutical drugs, right? So she's like, why does this drug dealer doctor like care? You know what I mean? But Sebastian was like, well, I don't know that. Like, I don't know that I'm supposed to be a drug dealer. And so he actually heads back to his room, because now he's curious. He's like, is the trunk in my room that I saw earlier, is that just like full of drugs? Like, what am I doing with a trunk full of drugs, right? So he pops open the trunk, but there's no drugs. And instead of the drugs, it's just a chess piece. And the only thing on the chess piece is the name Anna is carved like into the bottom of it. And he's just like, this is curious, right? And so while he's sitting there holding this chess piece, like, what am I supposed to do with this? Michael Hardcastle, the brother to Evelyn, comes and knocks on the door, and he was like, hey bro, you trying to come to this party? Like before, yeah, you trying to come to the dinner before the party? And Sebastian was like, not really, man. Like, I got a lot going on. You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to like figure shit out. So instead of going to the dinner before the party, he meets back up with Evelyn, and they head to the cemetery because either he found a note or she found a note. He found a note earlier that was left by this Anna, this mysterious Anna, to meet her at the cemetery. And Sebastian was like, well, I guess we got to go to the cemetery, because that's like the only thing that I remember is this name Anna, right? So the two of them, Evelyn and Sebastian, they head to the cemetery, and they wait and wait and wait, and Anna never shows up, right? So they're like, okay, well, like, that was a bust. And so they decide to head back to the house, but as they turn to leave, they actually see like a trail of blood on the leaves, and they were like, I don't like that, so let's get out of here, right? So Evelyn tells Sebastian, hey, just go back to your room. I'm going to arrange a carriage to come and pick you up so you can go home, because obviously there's something fishy going on. We don't know what it is. And, it seems like you might be caught up in it, but you've got amnesia. Like, she's trying to be a good guy and look out for him, right? So he's like, all right, bet. So he goes back to his room. But then as he turns and closes the door, he sees something on his bed. So he goes to check out the bed, and he sees that it's a dead rabbit, and the dead rabbit has like a note tied to it that says, "From your friend, the footman." And he's like, "The footman?" But like with all the stress going on, and you know, like he's just like not in his right mind, he ends up passing out. He ends up fainting. And you're like, okay, cool. So then it goes to the next chapter, and he wakes up the next morning to the sound of the doorbell, and he's like, damn, I really slept through the night. But then he realizes that he's not Sebastian, he's the butler, Mr. Collins, the same butler who answered the door the day before, right? And so not only that, he realizes that it's the previous morning. And he's like, what the fuck? And so he goes to answer the door, opens the door, and sees Sebastian Bell there, who's like looking all raggedy and stuff because he just came out the woods. And he's like, what is actually happening, right? And so then he ends up having to go through the day, like reliving the day as the butler, right? But then, you know, if you remember, when Sebastian Bell, he goes to find the butler to ask about the note, he was beat up. So at some point in the day, our protagonist gets jumped by Gregory Gold, the artist, and gets beat the fuck up and passes out. And so then he wakes up a short time later in the bed, all beat up, all bloody and stuff. And the plague doctor, the same plague doctor guy from earlier, is sitting there by the bed waiting for him to wake up, right? And so and so then the plague doctor was like, hey man, you're actually in your third host now, some guy named Donald Davies, and that tomorrow he'll be in another host. And you're like, what? Aren't I a butler? But he's like, no, now you're some guy named Donald Davies, right? And so the doctor, the plague doctor guy, the guy in the plague doctor suit, explains to him that at the party tonight, where all of the well-to-do guests and stuff are supposed to be in attendance, at the party there's going to be a murder. And if our protagonist can catch the killer, he'll be freed from this time loop of being stuck in the manor, right? And so the way it'll work is he'll have 8 days, like 8 total tries, I guess, as 8 different hosts to try and figure out who the murderer is. And if he can correctly name who the murderer is, then he'll get released from this time loop, right? And so our host, our protagonist, who's now in Donald Davies' body, he's like, fuck out of here, bro. I don't want anything to do with that. Like, I'm leaving. So he goes to the stable, he steals a car, and he just dips the fuck out. He said, I don't want anything to do with this, right? So he's driving away, gassing. And then, of course, the car, like, barely has gas in it. So, like, he doesn't get, like, super far away from the house. And then just when the car runs out of gas, conveniently, somebody steps out of the woods, and it's the plague doctor again. And the plague doctor was just like, bitch, I told you, you gotta figure this mystery out. Like, you can't just leave. But apparently, the plague doctor also tells him that there are 2 other people in the house in the same situation as him. So there's 2 other people that are also stuck in some kind of time loop. And they're wearing the body of somebody else, just how he is. And they're also trying to figure out the mystery to this murder. But the kicker is only one of them can leave the time loop. So there's 3 people that are experiencing the same type of time loop, but only one of them can correctly solve this murder mystery and actually leave, right? But Davies, our host, he's just like, fuck out of here. And so he just starts running. He just runs and runs and runs, and then we're in day 4. So day 4 starts, and our main protagonist, he wakes up in a new body, just like the plague doctor said. And this time he wakes up in the body of a person we already met. If you remember, Lord Ravencourt, the guy who was playing chess with Evelyn earlier. And the thing about Ravencourt is he's like a really like big man. Like, he's portly, right? And so he's like really, really dependent on his valet, this guy named Cunningham. So the valet has to like help him get out of bed, has to help like bathe him, brings him his meals, helps him get dressed, like everything. Like, he's really dependent on this guy, right? So he wakes up as Ravencourt, and he's just like, Cunningham, you gotta cancel all my appointments today. Like, I got some more important shit going on than having lunch with so-and-so. You know what I mean? But the thing is, he's like, Cunningham, cancel everything, but I still need to do my meeting with Lady Hardcastle, Helena Hardcastle. Like, I need to meet with her because if anybody in this house is going to know what's going on, it's going to be like the owner of the house. You know what I mean? So, the thing is, he's, at this point, he's in his fourth body. So he's like determined to figure out not only the mystery of the murder, but he needs to figure out the other potential hosts that he'll be in to maybe like try and like leave himself clues or like, you know what I mean? Like set himself up. So he's like almost working with himself like as each day goes by. And so Ravencourt tells his valet, he was like, hey man, like on the low, can you like ask around among the guests or whatever, or amongst the house guests, if anybody has a plague doctor costume? Because like, isn't it kind of random that like a guy in a plague doctor costume just happens to be here, you know? And so Cunningham was like, all right, you're asking some weird stuff, but whatever. And so Cunningham leaves, and then at this point Ravencourt, he's like tired because he's old and fat. So he decides to take a nap, right? So he goes to sleep. So then when he wakes up, our protagonist, our host, he's back on day 2. He's back in the body of the butler. And if you remember, the butler got the shit beat out of him, right? So he is laying in bed and like he can't move because, like I said, he got the shit beat out of him. And he hears a woman's voice explaining to him what exactly happened, right? So he was beaten by the resident artist named Gregory Gold. And Gregory Gold, you know, as we saw what happened to him, he's like strung up or whatever. And they took Mr. Collins to the gatehouse to recover because they're like, you know, we don't want to like scare the other maids or the other house guests or whatever. So we're going to take him to the gatehouse so he can like recover, right? Also gets explained to him that every time he wakes up, he'll be in a new host. And that'll happen every single time that he wakes up. He'll be like in another host. And the thing is, if the host falls asleep before midnight, like what happened with Ravencourt, he'll wake up in the body of the butler. And then once the butler falls asleep, then he'll, you know, then it'll continue down the line. So if Ravencourt is number 4, and he goes to sleep, he'll be the butler. And then he'll wake up and he'll either go back to number 4, or if it's after midnight, then he'll go on to host number 5. So that's kind of the way that it works, right? And then if a host sleeps past midnight or dies, so either one, if they fall asleep for the night, like, and it goes past midnight, or they die, that he'll go to the next host, and that previous one will be gone. He won't be able to inhabit that one again, right? So that's kind of the rules. Every time he falls asleep, and if it's not midnight, he'll wake up in the butler. And then after that, he'll either wake back up in the same one, or if it's past midnight, he'll go to the next one, right? So that's kind of the rules of how this works. So our host, our protagonist, he falls back asleep as the butler, wakes back up, and he's back in Ravencourt, right? Because it's not before midnight. And this time when he wakes up, he's in the library. And in the library, sitting with him is Daniel Coleridge. And if you remember, that was Sebastian's friend from the beginning, right? And Daniel, or Coleridge, turns to him and says that he is the last host. And Ravencourt, or our host, is like, is he the other one? Because remember, the plague doctor said there's 2 other people in the house that are in a similar situation as him, right? So Coleridge reveals that the person who gets murdered at the party tonight is Evelyn Hardcastle, the daughter, the chick that we were hanging out with earlier, right? And so Coleridge, he encourages Ravencourt. He says, bro, you need to find this Anna. Like, for some reason, she's like the one connecting piece between like all the hosts. So if you can find Anna, then we may be able to get some answers, right? But here's the kicker. Anna is currently being chased by the footman. And if you remember, when we were in our first host, the Sebastian, when we went to go hang out in our room, there was the dead rabbit with the note saying, from your friendly footman or whatever. So apparently the footman is like, he's like the rogue guy that's like trying to like fuck everything up. He's like trying to stop them from solving this mystery for whatever reason. right? So Ravencourt is like, okay, that's like a lot of information, but all right. So Coleridge leaves, and then the valet Cunningham comes back, and Ravencourt tells him to write a letter for him, and he should leave the letter in this encyclopedia, and they're just gonna put it back on the shelf in the library, right? So tuck that away, remember that. And then Ravencourt tells the valet Cunningham to go to the drawing room and just like check it out, like just see what's going on, right? See who's in there, who's talking to who, does anyone look shifty or shady, and then come back and tell me what's going on, right? So Cunningham was like, all right. So he leaves. And so while he's off on his errand, Ravencourt goes to find Evelyn, right? Because he was like, well, if I know for a fact that Evelyn's the one that gets murdered, I need to tell her, right? So like, you know, maybe she won't go to the party, or she could like, you know, keep an eye out for danger, right? So he goes to find Evelyn. And then we find out that Evelyn, like, does not fuck with Ravencourt. Like, she does not like him at all. You know, she's, like, disgusted by him. Doesn't want anything to do with him, right? And he's like, no, lady, like, I need to talk to you. And so she was like, well, the only way I'm going to talk to you is if you could beat me at a game of chess, right? But Ravencourt was like, but I kind of suck at chess. That's the issue. I kind of suck. So they play this game of chess. And if you remember, when we were in our first guy, Sebastian, when he came to the library, he saw Evelyn and Ravencourt super intently playing a game of chess. And that's why, because Ravencourt is really trying not to lose, but he does lose. And so he leaves dejected and sad because now she won't talk to him because he lost. But he heads back to meet up with the valet, with Cunningham, right? Because at this point, he should be done with his errand. So our protagonist, he meets back up with Cunningham, and he just takes a gamble. He was like, you know, this valet, Cunningham, like, I can tell that, like, we have a really good relationship, so I'm just gonna, like, tell him what's up. I'm just gonna tell him that I'm not actually Ravencourt, that I'm a host, and, like, I'm occupying his body, and this is what's going on, right? So he tells him all that, and while he's talking to him, he just gets, like, the sinking suspicion that the valet, like, is hiding something, because he just, like, is acting kind of weird. Like, he's acting kind of shifty. So he's like, either he saw something and doesn't want me to know, or, like, he just, like, has a secret that he doesn't want me to know, right? So Ravencourt, our host, he gives him an ultimatum. He was like, bro, this is what we're gonna do. I need you to find the note that was left for me earlier and read it. The note from Anna saying to meet her in the cemetery. I need you to find that note and read it. I need you to find the plague doctor costume, the guy that keeps running into me in the plague doctor costume. I need you to find it. I need you to kind of like spread some whisperings around that Ravencourt is looking for Anna. Like, you know, just kind of bring it up in conversation amongst people. So like the word is out there that I'm looking for Anna. And to also introduce yourself to Sebastian Bell, because he, our host, feels like we're gonna need all of the host's help. You know what I mean? Kind of what I was saying earlier with him leaving the note for himself. Like, at this point, being on the fourth host, our protagonist is like, I need to help myself, like, the best way I can. And if that's, you know, enlisting all my hosts while they're in different parts of the day, then so be it, right? So Ravencourt gives the valet this list of stuff to do, and he tells him that if he does not complete the list, that he will make it his personal goal. Like, homeboy said, I will drop everything and I will make this my goal to figure out what you're hiding, and I will tell everybody. Like, I don't give a fuck. I will tell everybody. And so Cunningham was like, all right, bet, chill, bro, chill. So he leaves. And so Ravencourt, he goes back to his room or whatever, or like the, what do you call it, a parlor, I guess, like the sitting room that's like near the bedrooms. And he gets a drink from one of the maids, and the maid introduces herself as Anna. And he's like, Anna. And so Anna tells him to stop looking for her. Like, bro, stop looking for me. Because the footman knows that they're working together, and she's afraid that Ravencourt is gonna like fuck it up and lead the footman right to Anna. She was like, you're being reckless, like you're not sneaky enough, and if you keep fucking around, the footman is gonna find me and murder me, right? And so Ravencourt was like, well, that's trash. But the other piece of information that Anna gives our host is that when she woke up, the only thing that she remembered was the name Aiden Bishop. And she thinks that that's the name of our host, of our protagonist, is Aiden Bishop, right? And so Ravencourt was like, all right, well, thanks for that information. I'll stop looking for you. And he's like, all right, bye. See you later. And so he goes to wait for his meeting that he's supposed to have with Helena Hardcastle, right? So he's waiting. Helena never shows up. And he's like, well, that's like rude. But instead of Helena, another older lady named Millicent Derby visits him instead. And so Millicent tells Ravencourt that she was also supposed to have a meeting with Helena earlier, and she also did not show up to that meeting. And so they were like, well, let's like go check out her room, I guess, to see, is she there? Is she like taking a nap? Like, what's going on, right? And so they go to the room, but then they see that it's actually been broken into. Like, the door's busted, there's like papers everywhere. And so they're like a little sketched out by that. And they see that there's like a case sitting on the desk, and the case has like the imprints, like there was 2 guns in the case, right? So 2 guns got stolen out of her room. And they also see like her day planner is open on the desk, and not only is it just out, but like it's missing, it has like a chunk of pages ripped out of it. And so they're like, this like is not good. But Ravencourt, of course he doesn't say this to Millicent, but he thinks that it was his valet that did it, because if you remember, he told him he needs to go figure shit out. So he was like, well, if that's Cunningham that did it, then like fine, but like I just gotta play dumb, right? So Ravencourt, he goes back to the library to meet back up with Cunningham, but Cunningham's not there. But then coincidentally, he sees that the encyclopedia that he left that note in earlier is fucking burning in the fireplace. He's like, who knows that I told my valet to leave myself a note, and now it's just burning in the fireplace, right? And so the only thing that he can think of is that the footman is like, it has like been listening, that like he's onto his trail, you know what I mean? And so the footman is like trying to fuck him up, like trying to sabotage him, right? And so after Ravencourt is sitting in the library for a bit, Cunningham shows back up, the valet, and he has news to report. He was like, well, I found out that the plague doctor costume belongs to a guy named Philip Sutcliffe. And the note at the well, so the note that they found earlier that told him to meet Anna at the cemetery, was left at the well. And that note was a warning to Evelyn to stay away from Millicent Derby. And they don't know why. He was like, I just hung out with her earlier. She seemed cool. And then the valet like admits to Ravencourt, because remember, Ravencourt was like kind of sketched out by him because he thought he was like hiding something from him. And so the valet, Cunningham, he just like confesses pretty much that apparently he like has a somewhat scandalous relationship with the Hardcastles. And that he was actually in Lady Hardcastle's room earlier, but doesn't know about the missing guns and doesn't know about the ripped out pages from the planner. So he must have been there before that happened, right? And so Ravencourt is like, scandalous relationship, huh? Let me just like tuck that info away. That might come back later. So he goes back to his room to rest, right? And so some time passes, and it's later on that evening, and it's time for the dinner before the party, right? And so Ravencourt gets to dinner, but he notices that there's like a lot of key people missing from attendance. So Millicent Derby's not there. He just saw her earlier. Both of the Hardcastles, so Peter and Helena, neither of them are there. The doctor that checked him out the first day, the doctor's name is Dr. Dickey. He's not there. And then the other weird thing is he sees Daniel Coleridge, who looks like he was in a fight. Like, he's got like a black eye and like a split lip, and he's like, what the fuck, right? And so he's like sitting there like trying to eat his dinner or whatever, and then Michael Hardcastle just gets up and, you know, clinks on his glass like, ding ding ding, I got an announcement, guys. And so Ravencourt's like, what is this about? And then Michael Hardcastle was like, guess what, guys, Evelyn and Ravencourt, they're gonna be engaged to be married. And everyone's like, yeah. And Ravencourt was like, hello, this is news to me. And you know, he turns to look at Evelyn, and Evelyn like looks pissed as fuck, and then she runs out of the party. And then Michael like runs out after her, and Ravencourt is like, hello. And so after dinner, Ravencourt and the valet Cunningham, they head to the party, where, if you remember, Evelyn is supposed to be murdered at this party, right? And so as they're like chilling at the party, you know, people are talking or whatever, there's music, whatever. Ravencourt and the valet Cunningham, they start to open up to each other a little bit more, right? And so our host, our protagonist, he introduces himself as Aiden Bishop, the name that Anna told him that she thinks that's his real name, right? And Cunningham, he reveals the thing that Ravencourt thought he was being shifty about. So he reveals that apparently the Hardcastles, they're going through like some tough financial times right now. Like, they have no money. And so they arranged the marriage between Evelyn and Ravencourt because they know that Ravencourt is rich, and they're expecting a large dowry because of like the political power that they have, or like the political influence they have. And one of those things where it's like their reputation, pretty much, you know. And so they agreed to marry Evelyn to Ravencourt if he agrees to buy the manor. Because at this point, it's like a huge old house that they just use for, like, I don't think they live there anymore. It's just kind of like a party situation. So, like, it's like a money sink at this point. You know what I mean? So they want him to just buy the house so they can, that's one less thing they got to worry about, right? And so Ravencourt and Cunningham, they make it to the ballroom, like where the main party is supposed to be going on. And funnily enough, they see like a bunch of people in Plague Doctor costumes. And Ravencourt was like, I didn't know this was a costume party, but like, okay. But then weirdly, Evelyn like is not here. She's not at the party where she's supposed to get murdered. And so he's like looking around, Cunningham's looking around. And then they see her through the door. They like see her outside, right? And he's like, what is she doing out there? And she's like looking, she's out there near like, what do they call it? Like a reflecting pool, like, you know, like one of those almost like fountain type things. And she's just sitting out there she's standing out there by herself, looking depressed. And Ravencourt was like, I guess she didn't take this engagement announcement too well, you know what I mean? But then he like sees something glittering in her hand, and he's like looking and looking, and he notices that it's a gun. He's like, why the fuck does this lady have a gun? And then she just takes the gun and shoots herself, and then falls into the pool and dies. He's like, hello? Because when they were talking earlier, remember, they were just playing chess like 6 hours ago, and she did not seem suicidal. And he's like, hello? Like, what is actually happening, right? And so there's like commotion, you know, like Michael, the brother, he's like, oh my God, my sister's dead. And everyone's like rushed around, whatever. And at this point, Ravencourt, remember, he's like an old fat man. So he kind of just like cozies up in his chair and like goes to sleep. And so our host, at this point, we know he's Aiden Bishop. He wakes back up in the butler. And there's a maid there who's like tending to his wounds, like wrapping his wounds and stuff, right? And the maid introduces herself as Anna. And Anna, so the thing with Anna is she's aware of the house rules that he's subject to. But she doesn't have any other hosts. So it's just Anna the whole day. And she also doesn't get any visits from the Plague Doctor. Because like from what our host can tell, the Plague Doctor is like low-key helping him. He's like not straight up like helping him, but he's like low-key like giving him hints and like trying to facilitate him figuring this mystery out, right? And so Anna tells Aiden, our host, that he told her that he has a plan to get both of them out of this time loop. But if you remember, the Plague Doctor said that only one person can get out. But but remember, he's like beat the fuck up, so like he can't really talk, right? So the doctor, that same doctor from the first time, Dr. Dickey, he shows up to check on the butler, and Anna warns Aiden / our host to act like they don't know each other, right? Like she's just a maid here to tend his wounds, and that's it, right? And so Dr. Dickey gets there, and he ends up giving him another sedative, and that causes him to fall back asleep, right? And so our protagonist, our host, he wakes up in our next host. So this is host number 5, Jonathan Derby. And this is the son to Millicent Derby that we met earlier, right? And so it's at this point in the story that our host realizes that like he doesn't have full control over these host bodies, where it's like his consciousness is there, but people that have like really strong personalities or strong tendencies, it's almost as if they're like fighting for control, you know what I mean? And so yeah. So the day starts, and Derby runs into his mom, Millicent, and Millicent has got some juicy gossip, right? She's like the gossip amongst the group of people here, right? And so the rumor, or the gossip is, there's a rumor going around that Cunningham, if you remember Ravencourt's valet, the rumor is that he is the illegitimate son of Lord Hardcastle. So Peter Hardcastle. That's scandalous, right? And so Derby, he meets back up with Anna, and Anna tells him that for some reason the footman, he always seems to be like one step ahead of them. Like, you know, no matter what they plan or like what they're trying to scheme, the footman like knows about it and like has accounted for it already, right? And it's at this point that our host, he's starting to like have some reservations about this like almost like blind trust he has in Anna, because it's like he doesn't know who she is. Like all he knows is that that's the only thing he remembered when he woke up. Like, you know what I mean? Like he doesn't know why he remembers her, or like, sure, she could say she's like trying to work with him, but like she could be working with the footman. Like he doesn't know, right? And it's at this point also that he starts to remember one of the conversations he had with the plague doctor. And he remembers that the plague doctor told him that our guy, our host, he's there by choice, but Anna is not. And you're just like, what? Hello? And so Anna and Derby, they like, you know, go their separate ways or whatever. And Derby is approached by Mr. Stanwin. And if you remember, that's the guy. No, that's not the guy with, see, even I'm getting confused. That's not the guy with the plague doctor suit. It's another guy. Mr. Stanwin. This guy tells Derby that apparently his mother, Millicent, is late on her payments, whatever these payments are, right? And Mr. Stanwin is like, bitch, tell your mom to give me the money. And he's like, we ain't got the money. Like, you gotta chill. And so things end up getting physical. And then out of the woodworks comes a couple of henchmen for Mr. Stanwin. And Derby, he ends up subduing the henchman. Like I think he cracks him over the head with a vase or something, and he runs away to the nearest room, which happens to be Lady Hardcastle's room. And if you remember, it was broken into earlier when Ravencourt found it before, right? So he locks himself in the room, and he finds a ledger, like not the day planner, it's a different book. He finds a ledger that like has some weird symbols in it, and the dates in the ledger go all the way back 19 years. And if you remember, it was 19 years ago that Thomas, the youngest brother, was murdered, right? And so he's like, this is kind of weird. So Derby, he takes the planner, or the ledger, and sticks it in his pocket. But then as he's like trying to sneak out the room, he gets bonked over the head and gets knocked out. And so it's at this point our host, he wakes up in the butler again, and the plague doctor is sitting next to him. And the plague doctor starts to explain to him that all the hosts somehow or some way have a connection to Evelyn's murder. That doesn't mean that they're the murderer or what, but some way they're all connected to this murder, right? He also explains that this loop that he's in now, he's done literally 1,000 times and has never figured it out. He's never figured out who the murderer actually was. And so, like I kind of said before, the plague doctor is like low-key like trying to help him. So the plague doctor this time around actually switched the order of his hosts. in hopes that he'll do a better job of figuring out this murder, right? So he explains that each time the loop restarts, he remembers something important from the previous time. So that's why when he woke up this time in the first host, that's why he remembered the name Anna. But the thing with Anna is that each time she restarts the loop, she actually remembers like a lot. And she knows more than she's letting on. Because if you remember, it's like every time they talk to each other, it's like she acts as if they're in the same boat, like they know the same amount of stuff. But actually, she knows like more than she's letting on, okay? And so our host is like, okay, cool information, bro. And then passes back out. So then he wakes back up in Derby. Remember, because he got bonked over the head. So he wakes back up as Derby, but then notices that the stuff that he stole from Lady Hardcastle's room is missing. So remember, he stole that ledger, but now it's gone. He steals a pistol off of Dr. Dickey. For some reason, the doctor like had a pistol, right? So he steals a pistol from him and then heads to the dinner party. The dinner that's before the party, right? And he notices that it's curious. Like, it's just so weird to him that Evelyn knows that she's gonna get murdered later, but does not seem nervous to be at this party or doesn't seem afraid or anything, right? Like, isn't that kind of weird? But instead of hanging out at the party, instead of hanging out at the dinner waiting for the party, he decides to go snoop in her room because maybe Evelyn knows something that she's not letting on. You know, like, why wouldn't you be nervous that you know that you're gonna get murdered later? So he goes to check it out. So he breaks into her room, but actually doesn't find anything cool. Like, nothing of interest. But the thing with Derby, so at this point, like I said, this is our 5th host. So he's over halfway through the host, and he's like determined to actually intervene in Evelyn's death, right? So he decides to wait in the hallway to catch her before she goes to the party. But it's here, as he's waiting, he's approached by Cunningham, Ravencourt's valet. And all Cunningham says to him is they'll be ready. And Cunningham like doesn't realize that it's not actually Derby. Like, he thinks he's actually talking to Derby. He doesn't know that it's the protagonist host in a new body. You know what I mean? And so once Derby explains that to him, the valet gives him a note. And all the note says is all of them. And he's like, what? Like, why is everything so cryptic? Like, why can't anybody just tell me what's actually going on? You know what I mean? And so Cunningham leaves. And then he sees Evelyn, like, rushing down the hallway. And she's, like, obviously upset. And he's just like, hello, lady. But she completely ignores him and then locks herself in her room. And Michael is running after her and is banging on the door, but she won't answer it, you know? And so then Michael tells him that they just learned about the arranged marriage between her and Ravencourt. And the thing is that if she doesn't agree to do the marriage, that they are threatening to cut both of them off from their inheritance unless she goes through with the wedding, right? So they both are like invested in this. Evelyn's like, of course I want my inheritance, but like, fuck this old fat guy. Like, I don't care about him. But yeah, so it's a whole thing, right? And so while they're chatting or whatever, Dr. Dickey, he shows up and, you know, he's looking real somber or whatever. And Dr. Dickey comes and tells Derby that apparently his mother, Millicent, had a heart attack and he found her dead. And you're like, what? Like, Millicent was nice. And the 2 scenes we had with her, like, she seemed like a nice lady. And then after he says this, Evelyn obviously heard this and comes out of her room, but like, she doesn't give a fuck that Millicent is dead. All she asks is, she asked Derby for the pistol that he stole off of Dr. Dickey earlier. And Derby was like, okay. And so the thing is, if you go by the timeline, Evelyn is supposed to be at the reflecting pool in like 10-ish minutes, like in about 10 minutes, when she's supposed to kill herself, right? So Derby gives her the pistol. And at the same time, right on the dot, in 10 minutes, Derby watches Evelyn shoot herself by the reflecting pool. But the thing is, as she shoots herself, Derby gets tackled, like he gets blindsided and tackled by Michael. And he realizes that the death scene is actually happening a little bit differently than it did when he saw it as Ravencourt. Because if you remember, the last thing you remember as Ravencourt is she shot herself and fell into the pool, and then there was commotion going on, and that was it. This time she shoots herself, but then falls into the pool, but then her body gets some guy in a trench coat drags her body out of the pool and like drags her away. And he was like, that did not happen last time. So like obviously something is going on where like he's able to influence like the events, you know what I mean? And so for some reason, Michael is like trying to beat him up, and he's like, bitch, get off of me, like I got more important stuff to do. So he breaks off from Michael and then pursues the guy in the trench coat. Turns out to be the footman who's leaving all these cryptic notes and that Anna was talking about and stuff. And so the footman turns around and he's like, haha, gotcha, bitch, and then like stabs him and then slits his throat, and then Derby dies. And so you're like, man, that like escalated, right? And so then our host, he wakes up in a room to someone banging on the door, right? It turns out to be Gregory Gold, who is the artist who beat up the butler, and now we learn that he's also a host. He tells our host, or no, I lied to you. Our host, he doesn't know who he is. He wakes up to Gregory Gold banging on the door, and Gregory Gold tells him to not get out of the carriage, that he never stops cutting, and that she'll tell them everything, and that there's two of them. But our host, he doesn't know what's going on. Like, he doesn't even know who he is. But then Gregory Gold just turns around and runs down the hallway. And you're like, okay. So that's that. And then we move on to our sixth host. So he wakes up again. This is like this is like the eighth time. He wakes up again. And now he is, he realizes he's a guy named Edward Dance. And he's actually awoken by his son. And as soon as he like opens his eyes, he like feels Dance's like disdain for his son. So I don't know if it's something where it's like each time he switches hosts, their innate personality is stronger, or if it's just like certain people have stronger personalities than other ones. But just kind of like with Derby, our host realizes that Dance, his personality is like strong and is like really pushing against him, right? So he's trying his best to like keep things in control, and he heads off to his next scheduled meeting. And so he's supposed to be meeting with like it's like around lunchtime maybe, but he's supposed to be meeting with some other gentlemen, right? So it's supposed to be Sutcliffe. That's the guy that owns the plague doctor costume that Cunningham found earlier. Commander Harrington, he's just like a police commander guy. Christopher Pettigrew, and then Peter Hardcastle. And they're all sitting down, and they're drinking their scotch or whatever, having a good time. And they learn that Cunningham has been asking around about the death of Thomas Hardcastle. And if you remember, Ravencourt told Cunningham to spread the word around to make it seem as if he was looking for him, right? So, as Ravencourt intended, the twittering gets around to Peter and then his friends. And so, Sutcliffe, he reveals that Cunningham actually grew up at Blackheath Manor. Like, he grew up here. And surprisingly to our host and to Dance, he confirms that Cunningham is the illegitimate son of Lord Hardcastle. And so this is like big news, because like I said, Dance did not know this, and this confirms what our host Aiden thought, right? We learn in this meeting that the three men, so Dance, Pettigrew, and Sutcliffe, they all have a law firm together, and it's those three are the ones that wrote up and created the marriage contract for Ravencourt and Evelyn. And we also learned that the group as a whole, they're all being blackmailed by Stanwin. And if you remember, he was the guy earlier that approached Derby talking about how his mom owed him money. So apparently they're all getting blackmailed by Stanwin. And they desperately are trying to figure out a way to like get him off their backs. Let's like get him out of here, right? They don't really come up with a good solution, and the party decides to break up, because I think at this point they have to get ready to go for that hunting trip, right? And so as people start to leave, Dance, he hangs back so he can talk to Peter one-on-one, right? And he tells Peter, hey man, somebody's planning to murder your daughter tonight. This is gonna sound weird, it's gonna sound kind of wild, but do you think that the person who could be orchestrating this is your wife, Helena? And Peter, surprisingly, is not like offended, but he doesn't think that Helena would do something so extreme. Like, yeah, she's like kind of dramatic or whatever, but like she wouldn't kill her own daughter. You know what I mean? And so Dance, he wants to speak with Helena. Because at this point, we're in host number 6, and he's been trying for like 4 hosts to run into Helena and like has not seen her, right? And so Peter gives Dance her planner so he can know exactly like where she'll be, so he can try to like intercept her, you know? And so he's looking at the planner, and we know that Helena misses her meeting with Evelyn. We know that she misses the meeting with Millicent, and we know that she misses the meeting with Ravencourt. So Dance decides to go and try to find her at the stables, which is another thing that was in her planner, right? And so Peter Hardcastle, he shares with Dance that Stanwin is actually blackmailing Helena. It's not that he's really blackmailing the group. Like, he keeps saying that Stanwin is blackmailing the group, but like actually he's got it out for Helena. And he somehow found out that Cunningham is actually her illegitimate child. Because remember, the rumor that's been going around is that Cunningham is his illegitimate child. Turns out it's actually her illegitimate child. And you want to know who the dad is? Charlie Carver, the man who supposedly murdered Thomas, the baby brother. You're like, what is actually happening, right? And so Dance, he's like, I gotta get out of here. I gotta go find this bitch, right? So he leaves, goes to the stables. But once again, Helena is nowhere to be found. Like, where is this lady, bro? Like, where is she? And so instead of finding Helena, he finds the stable master, this guy named Alf Miller. We'll never see him again, so don't even remember that name. But he runs into the stable master, who is chatting it up with Cunningham, right? The valet. Cunningham is over here grilling him about the death of Thomas, because that stable master has been working for the grounds since before Thomas was murdered, right? So he's like really trying to get details out of him, whatever. And Alf, he confesses to them. He was like, hey man, I've been here for a minute. I seen some stuff. And you know what? There's just no way that Charlie Carver could have killed Thomas, because Charlie Carver was with Helena at the time when Thomas died. And so now you're like, did Helena kill Thomas? Like, somebody killed Thomas. Like, who was it, right? So Dance is like, I need to get down to the bottom of this. Like, who, like, and the only reason why he's so stuck on this is because he feels like if he can figure out who killed Thomas, he can figure out what happened to Helena, what's going on with Evelyn, and then try to figure out who was trying to murder Evelyn. You know what I mean? So Dance decides to go and talk to Stanwin, the guy who's blackmailing everybody. And because Stanwin has been a family friend or like a family acquaintance for like a minute. So he would have known what actually happened that night that Thomas got murdered. And if you remember from the beginning, all the guys head out on that hunting trip. Stanwin, he's out on the hunting trip, so Dance agrees to go out too, right? So the group, they get their gear, they get their guns or whatever, and they head out into the forest. And everyone kind of just like splits off into smaller groups, but he is really trying to like figure out a way to get Stanwin by himself. Like, Stanwin just conveniently always is like with somebody else, so he's really trying to figure out a way how to get him by himself. But remember, Dance is like an old man, so like he gets a little sleepy and needs a nap. And so he goes and like finds like a, like an abandoned wall or something to rest on, and he goes and he just rests his eyes a little bit. And in those brief moments that he's asleep, he wakes back up in the Butler, and the plague doctor is there again. And the plague doctor tells him that, hey man, one of your rivals is getting really close to figuring out this mystery. So like, you need to like get a move on, right? And we find out, I think I might have mentioned it earlier, but the plague doctor confirms that Aiden has been through this time loop like thousands of times. But this time is the closest he's ever gotten to figuring it out. And so the plague doctor is like, you can do it, bro. Like, I believe in you, right? And so Dance wakes back up, or our host wakes back up in Dance. And in the forest. And he it's his time to shine. He sees that Stanwin is alone, right? And so he goes to try and talk to him, but then out of nowhere, Daniel Coleridge pulls his gun and shoots him dead. And you're like, hello? Hello? What is happening? And Coleridge is just like not sorry about it. He says that all the secrets that Stanwin had, like, they would have been wasting their time trying to like grill him, because like he wouldn't have talked. So all of the secrets that he had are in a notebook that he stole off his body. And now all of the 4 lawyers are sworn to secrecy about his murder, about like, who killed him and like how he died, right? So you're like, okay. And so the gang, the 4 of them, they head back to the house, and then Dance, he heads to his room because he's like, I need to like decompress. I just witnessed a murder. But then once he gets in his room, he sees that Anna is like tied up in the corner, right? And he's like, what the fuck? But then right when he is about to say something, the footman jumps out of nowhere and stabs him in the chest and kills him. And you're like, hello? And then our host wakes back up in the butler. And then this time when he's in the butler, somebody's holding him down. And he's like, hello? Like, I'm already beat up. Like, you don't got to hold me down. And then you hear the footman ask somebody, is this him? And then you hear Anna reply and say yes. And then the footman stabs and kills him. So at this point, the footman has killed, what, 4 of them? 4 of his 8? Right? Killed the butler. Killed Dance. Killed Derby. Oh, maybe it's just 3. Yeah, maybe it's just 3. Well, and then the first guy, Sebastian Bell, he's out because it was past midnight. Let's see. Ravencourt is still alive. And then we have 3 more that we haven't met. Okay. Anyway. So, yeah. So he kills the butler. He kills Dance. And now our host wakes up in our next host. And he wakes up. He's confused as fuck. He doesn't know what's going on. Why did I just get stabbed 3 times? And so he wakes up as Constable Jim Rashton. And this is a guy we actually haven't ran into yet. He's been around, like he's been in the periphery, but like we just haven't directly interacted with him yet. And so now we're in our 7th host. So like our guy is like, we have no time to lose. Okay. We are running out of people. You know what I mean? Like we got stuff to figure out. So, while our host is Rashton, we figure out a few important things. We know that Stanwin knows the truth about Thomas's murder. We know that he knows who actually murdered Thomas. We know for a fact that Helena and Charlie Carver were actually having an affair. And we know that Helena was found by the lake cradling a dead Thomas, who was stabbed through the neck, right? And then you find out that it was actually Helena that killed Thomas. But the rumor that got spread around, or the story that got spread around, is so Charlie Carver told Stanwin to spread the word around that he killed Thomas, not Helena. And you're like, why would Helena kill her son, bro? Like, it's just not making sense, right? You also learn that Daniel Coleridge, who we thought was our homie, remember he said that he was the last host? We learned that Coleridge and the footman, they are actually in cahoots together. So they are like helping each other out. So that's like really inconvenient. Not only that, but they are both hunting Anna on behalf of the plague doctor. And you're like, okay, that's just like not making sense, because the plague doctor is helping us. So like, why is he trying to hunt for Anna? Right? We also learned that Rashton is close friends with both Evelyn and Cunningham, right? And so Cunningham had said earlier that morning that he actually ran into Helena. He's like the only person that has seen Helena today. And that she said that she's putting things right, whatever that means. And so at this point, Rashton is like, I need to find Anna. Like, I need some answers. Shit's getting a little weird. I need some answers, right? So he goes out looking for her and finds her in Peter Hardcastle's room, and sees that Peter Hardcastle is just dead in his bed. And he was like, hello? Another murder? How many murders am I gonna witness, bro? Right? And there's a letter in his pocket from Evelyn saying that she just couldn't go through with this marriage to Ravencourt. Like, there's just no way that she could do it. And the fact that she can't forgive her family for forcing her to do something like this. And, you know, Rashton, like I said, he's a constable. He's a smart guy. He's a detective. He's putting things together. He's like, there's no way that Evelyn would just kill her dad, right? So, like, someone's trying to frame her for killing her dad. You know what I mean? Like, it's just too convenient. The fact that he happens upon the body, there's a note in the pocket explaining why Evelyn would have wanted him dead. You know what I mean? And so he tells Anna to tell Evelyn. Wait. Yes. So Rashton, like I said, he's a detective, right? Like, he's a smart guy. So he's looking around. He sees that there's some footprints outside of the window and that they're smaller, so they have to be like a woman's footprint, right? And then he goes and he sees that there's a drink next to Peter's body, his scotch or whatever. He sniffs the scotch and realizes that it was poisoned. So like I said, at this point, he's like, no, someone is definitely trying to frame Evelyn. Like, shit's not adding up. You know what I mean? And so he tells Anna to go find Evelyn and tell Evelyn to go to the butler. Because he knows, because if you remember, it's like every time he wakes up, it's like the beginning of the day. So at this point, the butler's not dead. So he was like, Anna, go tell Evelyn to go meet with the butler, right? And so Rashton, he goes to the butler and he's waiting for them to show up. Neither ever show up, of course. So he breaks into Evelyn's room and he's looking for clues, finds nothing. Breaks into Helena's room and then happens to find a vial of blood, a syringe of some fluid that he doesn't know, a small pistol, and then a revolver, the one that Evelyn will have later, right? And so Rashton is like, something seems fishy. Like, something's not adding up, bro. And so Rashton heads to the party. It's like, at this point in the night, dinner's already happened, so they're going to the party. He seeks out Evelyn in the ballroom, and he confronts her because at this point he knows that she's faking her suicide. He knows that with the vial of blood, she's just making it look like she is killing herself. So his working theory is that she kills herself to get out of the marriage and that she's just gonna like leave and like never look back, right? And so he approaches Evelyn and tells her, hey girl, I know that you're like faking your death or whatever, but like I need you to actually like still go through with it, like still make it look like you're killing yourself, because I'm pretty sure that I can figure out who is actually trying to murder you if you like fake murder you. Okay. So she's like, okay, bet. So at dinner, as we've seen it 3 times now, Evelyn shoots herself. And then while the commotion is going on, Rashton, who was hiding outside, he drags her body out of the pool and then takes her to the sunroom. He pulls her out of the pool, and then the maids come and they take her body to the sunroom. And Rashton goes to the sunroom and he kind of like hides because he knows that somebody is gonna come looking for her body to either confirm that she's dead, or if she's not actually dead, to actually kill her, right? So he's kind of hiding in the cut. And then we as the reader don't know this, but apparently Rashton had told Cunningham to convince Michael to come meet in the sunroom, the brother, right? And he had given Cunningham one of the guns that he had seen in Helena's room earlier for self-defense, right? So Rashton's hiding in the corner. Cunningham brings Michael to the sunroom with Evelyn's body, and then Cunningham leaves. He was like, oh man, I'll give you a minute to like mourn your sister or whatever. So Cunningham leaves, and then like as soon as Michael thinks he's alone, he goes and tries to shoot Evelyn for real. But then the thing is, the gun that Rashton left him, he jammed it so it couldn't actually fire. And so Rashton like jumps out and he's like, haha, I got you, bitch, like, time to interrogate. And then Michael pretty much like spills the beans that he wasn't working with Evelyn. His whole plan was that he was going to backstab pretty much Evelyn because he needs his inheritance, and he knows that she's like trying to figure out a way to get out of this marriage. But the thing is, the family, if you remember, I said it before, the family is like hard to do right now. Like, they're not doing great financially, and the family like straight up can't pay for this forged death certificate that they'll need for her suicide. So Michael's plan was, I'll just kill her for real. We don't need a forged birth certificate, and then I can still get my inheritance because it's not like she didn't agree to do the marriage. She died, if that makes sense. And so Michael like spills the beans. He spills his guts or whatever, and Rashton's like, but why? Like, I'm just not understanding. And then before he can like keep talking to him or whatever, Michael grabs a drink that's sitting there on the counter and takes a big old swig, and then you realize that that's the same drink that Peter drank from earlier that was poisoned. So Michael poisoned himself, and then he dies, and you're just like, what the fuck is happening? And so Michael dies. Rashton is literally like, okay. But then of course the footman shows up, the footman, and he was like, haha, bitch, 2 to go, stabs him, kills him. And you're like, okay. So our host Aiden, he wakes up in a carriage that is approaching Blackheath Manor, and there's 2 ladies in the carriage with him, and they're like, they said they found him sleeping on the side of the road. And so if you remember, this would be Donald Davies, because remember, he stole that car, tried to leave, it ran out of gas, and then he tried to just run, and then he must have just run until exhaustion and passed out. So these ladies found him, brought him back to the manor. And so he, at this point, like, everything that he's been learning, like, catches up with him. So he jumps out of the carriage and he runs to the stables and grabs a shotgun that he knows will be there. And then Davies runs into Daniel Coleridge, and he knows that he's working with the footman, right? Remember, we learned that earlier. And so when he rolls up on Coleridge, he just like has the gun pointed at him. And so Daniel Coleridge explains his strategy of using the footmen to kill Aiden's hosts in order to improve his own chances of solving the murder. Because at this point we realize that Daniel, remember, it's 3 people total that are stuck in this time loop. There's our host, like our main protagonist, there's Daniel, and there's Anna. And so Daniel's whole thing is, well, if I can just kill all of Aiden's hosts, that'll give me a better chance of figuring out who the murderer is, right? So that's why he's working with the footmen. And then suddenly someone rolls up behind Davies and is pushing a gun into his back. And so he's forced to drop the gun. And then you see a person in a plague doctor costume approach, and you're like, man, not my boy, the plague doctor. I thought he was working with us. But then it turns out it's not the same plague doctor. It's another one. This one is actually named Silver Tear. And this is the plague doctor that we saw talking to Daniel earlier. So it's not that our plague doctor was working with Daniel. It was that Daniel was working with this plague doctor named Silver Tear, right? And so Silver Tear, she rolls up and she says that she's actually really impressed with Aiden's progress in figuring out who the murderer is, because kind of like how the plague doctor said before, this is the closest anybody's ever gotten to figuring out the murder. But then at the same time, she's disappointed because her colleague, the plague doctor that's been talking to us, he's been technically breaking the rules by changing the order of Aiden's hosts. They're supposed to be more just like overseers. They're not supposed to like mediate in this murder mystery. You know what I mean? And so Silver Tear tells Aiden that she's at the manor because Aiden and Anna are so close to figuring out the murder. But the thing is that she plans to remove Anna before they do, so Anna can't escape. So you're just like, so Aiden can leave, but Anna can't leave? And so then Silver Tear tells Daniel to convince Davies to tell her where Anna is so she can go snatch her. And so Davies just pretty much attacks our hosts, right? So they're fighting, they're scuffling, they're rolling around, there's guns, gun gets kicked, whatever. And then Daniel ends up hitting him so hard that he's able to drag Davies to the edge of the lake, right? And then he's like, haha, I got you, bitch. And so Coleridge then like holds his head under the water and is starting to drown him. And then, you know, he stops flailing and stops fighting at this point. So Coleridge was like, I gotcha. And so he leaves. He's like, you know, got him. So he leaves. And because he just assumes that at this point Davies, our host, is drowned, whatever. But then somebody pulls his body out of the water, and they're like, you know, slapping his face, and you learn that it's Anna, and Anna's like, you gotta find me in the morning in the entrance hall. And then at this point, Davies is too far gone, so he drowns and he dies. And so our final host turns out to be Gregory Gold, the artist that beats the shit out of the butler. So our host wakes up, and our last host, and he is like drugged up. Of course, why wouldn't he be? He's an artist. He's drugged up on drugs that he bought from Sebastian Bell, if you remember our first host. And as he's high as a kite, he has this strike of inspiration, and he decides to physically map out all of the hosts, all of the players, and how their actions play out over the day, right? And so he's doing all this, and then after he does this, he ends up with 2 questions that he can't answer. What did Millicent know? Because why did she just happen to have a heart attack? So Millicent had to have known something, right? So what did Millicent know? And where the fuck is Helena? Nobody has seen Helena today. It's been an entire day and nobody has seen Helena. Her own husband hasn't even seen her today. So where is she, right? So our plague doctor shows up and tells our host that he's actually solved Evelyn's murder. But here's the bad news. The plague doctor explains to him that she can't leave. So what Silvertear was saying is not false. She can't leave. The plague doctor then goes on to explain that they're in like a type of prison almost. And the way it works is it locks prisoners inside a murder. And then they have to figure out who... So the way it works is it locks prisoners inside of a murder. And then they have to atone for their own sins by solving this murder. Right? So the idea is that like in life, I guess, they murdered somebody. And then to atone, they are stuck in somebody else's murder and then have to figure it out to, you know, make it better or whatever. To atone for their wrongdoing, right? But here's the main difference between Aiden, our host, and Anna. So Anna, she did murder somebody, like IRL. That's why she's there. But Aiden, he chose to come to this prison. And the big reason why is because Anna killed Aiden's sister. And he came to get revenge on Anna. Like, he wants to fuck Anna up. Like, that's why he came. And you're just like, man, that's like kind of dark, right? But then Aiden, he's trying to convince the plague doctor that Anna's changed from the person that she was when she committed this murder. Because to him, he doesn't even remember that he had a sister, that his sister died. You know what I mean? So, like, it's not fair to Anna to keep her trapped here when she helped figure out the murderer and she's a different person now. You know what I mean? But then here's the kicker. Aiden has figured out that there's actually a second murderer in the mansion. And so he convinces the plague doctor. He was like, man, just give me a couple more hours, meet up with me later, and I'm going to figure out who killed Millicent. Because there's just no way that she conveniently died of a heart attack right when she was gossiping about Cunningham being the illegitimate child of Lord Hardcastle. You know what I mean? Like, the math ain't mathin', right? So Aiden meets up with Anna, as she had told him earlier. If you remember when he was drowning, Anna said to meet with him in the entrance hall. So he meets up with her and gives her a sketchbook And in the sketchbook, that's where he wrote down all of his like musings, all his grand inspiration of all the moving pieces, all the hosts, all the people, how they interact, what they did, and explains that is literally the only advantage they have over Daniel. Because the issue is, since Daniel's working with the footmen, they're both trying to murder all of Aiden's hosts to stop like the knowledge from being passed on. You know what I mean? And so he gives her the notebook and he was like, go figure shit out. And then it's at this point that he realizes that, oh, I'm the artist. I've got to beat the shit out of the butler. And so this is the first time where, like, as the host, he has to do a thing to keep the line of events in order. You know what I mean? And so this, like, really fucks him up because he does not want to, like, the butler was literally beat almost to death. And he does not want to do that. But he knows for the sake of getting out, he's got to. So he jumps the butler. He's beating the shit out of him. And then as he's beating him up, suddenly Constable Rashton knocks a vase over his head, knocking him out to stop him from finishing the beating, right? So our host finally wakes up back in the butler. But you're like, wait, didn't the butler get stabbed by the footman earlier? He did, but he didn't die. He passed out from the pain. And so he sees Anna in the room. She's tied up to the radiator. And then the footman, he enters the room, and he's with one of the thugs that were rolling with Stanwin earlier. And the footman, he wants to know where Davies is. Because he knows that Davies knows some stuff, and they need to kill Davies, right? So Aiden tells him that Davies will be at the stables. Okay? So Anna, she, while they're chatting or whatever, Anna gets loose. She, like, gets her rope off or whatever, and then she tries to jump the footman, but of course the footman has a knife. I mean, we just seen him stab like 6 people, right? So the footman has a knife, and Aiden is able to like knock the knife out of his hand, and then while Anna is like grappling with him, Aiden, as the butler, is able to pick up the knife and stab the footman. But the footman, he ain't no bitch, so he's not gonna go down that easy. And so then Anna, she grabs, there's a shotgun that was under the bed. Anna grabs the shotgun and shoots the footman, killing him. And then finally the butler passes out from the pain. I mean, he got the shit beat out of him. He got stabbed. He just wrestled a guy. You know, he's hurt. He's going through it. So he passes out. And so then our host, we wake back up in Gregory Gold, the artist. And at this point, he's strung up on the hook to the ceiling, right? Anna shows up and she cuts him down. And then they head to the lake to meet the plague doctor, like they agreed upon earlier. They enter the boathouse there at the lake, and they find Helena's body. She's been dead since this morning. Somebody murdered her. They also see a bag of bloody woman's clothing. And they're like, what is actually happening, bro? And so here's the thing. They see a lantern approaching. They see somebody approaching. And Aiden tells Anna that when he was still rolling with Cunningham, he had Cunningham spread a rumor that him and Anna were going to use the boathouse for something. And he had him spread that rumor so then the murderer, the real murderer, would hear that and then try to, kill them or whatever. Try to come in and meet them at the boathouse to fuck them up, right? And so Aiden tells Anna that once whoever is approaching, whoever's got this lantern and is approaching, once you know who they are, you'll know who kills, you'll know the real murderer, so you'll be able to escape, right? All you got to do is tell the plague doctor who the murderer is. And so the lantern carrier approaches, and then it turns out to be the maid Madeline from the very beginning, the one that gave him the note at the very beginning. But then we learn that it's not actually Madeline. It's the real Evelyn Hardcastle. And so at this point, okay, here's what's going on. Evelyn is the one that actually murdered Thomas when they were kids, right? So apparently Thomas had seen her sneaking around with the stable boy, and she knew that her parents wouldn't be cool with her fucking with the stable boy. So one day when her and the stable boy were out, he like fell in a hole, but then instead of helping him out the hole, she just like left him there. And then Thomas saw her leave with him, but come back without him. And so he was like grilling her about it. So obviously the next course of action would be to murder him. And then Evelyn also killed her father, Peter, earlier that day, so that Michael, who was actually partnered with Coleridge, so we thought Coleridge was working with the footmen, but Coleridge was actually working with Michael because they wanted to buy Stanwin's blackmail business to get him off everybody's back, right? Because Michael's whole thing was no matter what, he's trying to get his inheritance. So he was like, well, if we can get rid of the blackmailer, then we don't have to worry about anything anymore, right? And then Evelyn also killed Helena because she was pissed that Helena was trying to make her marry Ravencourt. And then Millicent was murdered because she recognized Evelyn pretending to be the maid, Madeline. And then another maid, Felicity, was working with Stanwin with the blackmail business. Somehow she got roped into Evelyn's plan, and so she was like going along with it, like trying to help her, right? And so while Evelyn is monologuing, Aiden is, at this point, he's just trying to stall for the plague doctor to get there because he's like, all we have to do is tell him who the real murderer is and we can get the fuck out. Like, we won't die. All we got to do is tell him what happened and we'll get out of here, right? But then Anna attacks Evelyn for some reason. And so she's like beating the shit out of her on the ground, but then they hear a gunshot go off. And so everybody stops and looks. And then it turns out to be Felicity. The one, like I just said, the one that was working with Stanwin with the blackmail and got roped along, blah, blah, blah. Felicity shows up and we thought that it was just like a warning shot, but she actually shot Evelyn, killing her. And then, of course, conveniently, then the plague doctor arrives and just like casually takes the gun from Felicity. It was just like, yeah, I'll take that. And then the plague doctor he admitted that he didn't actually know who the real Evelyn was until Aiden and Anna figured it out. And so at this point, the plague doctor is like, well, Aiden, he solved the murders for Michael, Peter, and Helena, which will grant his release because he did find a murderer. And then he looks to Anna, who says that Evelyn's murderer is actually Felicity, which is true. And then the plague doctor grants her release as well, right? And so the plague doctor, he explains that with her freedom of getting out of this Blackheath Manor, Anna will be returned to her things, whatever that means, including her memories. And at this point, Aiden realizes that at this point, we're at the end of the book, and Aiden doesn't know who she is, what she did, where she's from. Like, he don't know shit about her, right? And so then the plague doctor leaves with Anna, walking her toward her freedom, like toward the gate to get them out or whatever, I guess. And then Aiden realizes that the thing that was binding him to this place wasn't his like seek to revenge to get Anna, but it was the hosts that he was inhabiting. And that's how it ends. Guys, when I tell you, this story had me so tired. Like, it started off so good. Like, I was so interested. Like, oh, a whole like body swapping thing, like that's so interesting. But then like, it was like by the time it like got to dance, I was just kind of confused. I was like, I kept having to go back and like reread stuff, and I was like, they're just making stuff happen for the fact of making shit happen. Like, I don't know. But you see what I mean when I say that's why it took me a whole month to write these notes, because there's so many moving pieces and so many characters where you think they're not important, but then they show back up at the end, or they're mentioned once but then never mentioned again. Like, I don't know. I don't want to say that I don't like murder mystery, because I'm sure I would. I just don't know if this is the one for me. You know what I mean? So if you remember way back at the beginning when I said it had a 3.86 on Goodreads, that's why I kind of agree with that. I think I would probably give this book like a, I don't know, like a 3 out of 5, maybe. just because it started so strong and like was such an interesting concept, but I just feel like it got too wibbly wobbly and just didn't know. I feel like it was just an example of a book just not knowing how like where to go, like how to finish it. Like the premise is really strong, but it just didn't know how to finish it. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Final verdict, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. Let me know down in the comments, what did you think? Was it confusing? Were you confused like me, or was it just me? Do you guys like murder mysteries? Maybe I can read more of them. Maybe I can find like a better one. Like maybe I'll find like a higher rated one and read it, and then we can like compare and see like how does it compare to this one? But yeah, this book took a lot out of me, if you couldn't tell. I'm tired. But like always, guys, leave me a comment. What did you think? Book recommendations. I'll give you a book recommendation. Like, comment, and subscribe, and all the. I'm everywhere on all the things, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Yeah, guys. I never know how. Like, literally, I never know how to end these. So I'm just gonna end it. Love you guys. Bye.